Number 10, Astyages, king of the Medes. In the middle of the 6th century BC, before Persia exists, as an empire before Cyrus the Great has conquered a single city, a Median king sits on the throne at Ecbatana and dreams. In the dream, his daughter Maiden floods the whole of Asia with a river of urine. The Magi, his priests, tell him what it means. Her son will destroy his kingdom. Astyages does what tyrants have always done with prophecy. He tries to kill the future. He arranges for his daughter to marry a man he considers beneath her, a Persian named Cambyses, hoping to weaken the bloodline. And when Maiden gives birth to a boy, Astyages summons his most trusted general, a man named Harpagus, and hands him the newborn wrapped in swaddling. Take this infant, the king says, take him to your house, and kill him. Harpagus cannot do it. The child is royal blood, is king's own grandson, and Harpagus is a man of the old order, a man who still believes that some acts stain the doer forever. So, he hands the baby to a herdsman named Mithridates, tells him to expose the child on a mountain, and walks away hoping the mountain will do what his own hands could not. But the herdsman's wife has just given birth to a stillborn son. She swaps the babies. The dead child is exposed. The living child, Cyrus, grows up in a herdsman's hut believing he is a peasant. 10 years pass. Cyrus, playing with village boys, is chosen as their king in a game. He beats another boy who disobeys his royal orders. The beaten boy's father complains to the actual king. Astyages meets the child, recognizes his own daughter's features in the boy's face, and understands what has happened. Harpagus disobeyed him. And now Astyages does something so monstrous that Herodotus records it 100 years later with the horror of a fresh wound. He invites Harpagus to a banquet. He tells him to send his own son, a boy of about 13, to serve at court. He then has the boy killed, dismembered, and cooked. The head, the hands, and the feet he sets aside in a covered basket. The rest of the meat he serves at the banquet. Harpagus eats. He does not know what he is eating. He tells his king it is delicious, and when he is finished, Astyages has slaves carry in the covered basket, sets it before Harpagus, and asks him to lift the lid. Harpagus looks inside and sees his son's severed head staring back at him. He does not cry out. He does not attack the king. He does not do any of the things a broken man would do. He looks up at Astyages with a face so blank the slaves whisper about it for years afterward, and he says only that whatever the king wishes is well. Then he asks permission to gather the remains for burial. He takes his son home, he buries what is left of the child, and he begins a 20-year campaign of patience so cold and complete that Astyages never sees it coming. Years pass, decades pass, Cyrus grows into a man, becomes king of Persia in 559 BC, and begins consolidating power. Harpagus, still serving at the Median, court still smiling at the king who fed him, his son sends a secret message to Cyrus. He sews it inside the belly of a dead hare and gives the hare to a huntsman as a gift for Cyrus to enjoy on the road. When Cyrus opens the animal and reads the letter, he learns the entire Median army is ready to defect. In 550 BC, the two armies meet on the plains of Pasargadae. Astyages, still confident he can crush this Persian upstart, puts Harpagus in command of his own troops. In the middle of the battle, on Harpagus' signal, the Median army turns and marches to the Persian side. Astyages is captured. His empire ends in a single afternoon, and Cyrus the Great, the son who was supposed to die on a mountain, inherits the world. Astyages himself is spared, kept alive at Cyrus's court as a defeated relic dying a slow, humiliated death in captivity. His name survives only because the man he tried to erase became the founder of the largest empire the world had yet seen. The lesson the ancient world took from Astyages was not a moral one. It was operational. Never serve a man his own son unless you are willing to kill him the same night. Because if you leave him alive, he will wait. He will smile. And when the moment comes, he will hand your empire to your enemies without lifting a sword. Number 9. Caracalla and the day Alexandria's young men vanished. In December of 2015 AD, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, better known by the nickname Caracalla, for the hooded Gallic cloak he wore, arrives in Alexandria at the head of a full military escort. He is 27 years old. He has already murdered his own brother Geta 4 years earlier, stabbing him to death in their mother Julia Domna's arms, and then attempting to erase Geta's name from every inscription in the empire. This is a man who understands erasure. He has come to Egypt to visit the tomb of Alexander the Great, whom he worships with a mania that his own soldiers find unsettling. The Alexandrians, who have watched 3 centuries of Roman emperors come and go, receive him with public celebrations, festivals, and processions. And behind his back, they mock him. This is what Alexandria does. This is what Alexandria has always done. The city produces satires the way other cities produce olive oil sharp verse that cuts anyone who wears a crown. They call his mother Jocasta, after the mother of Oedipus, whispering that Caracalla has designs on her. They compose jokes about the murder of Geta, about the emperor's small stature, about his pretensions to being a reincarnation of Alexander, when in truth he is a mediocre little man wearing borrowed glory. Caracalla learns of the mockery. He does not respond. He continues to smile through the festivals. He tells the Alexandrians he wishes to organize a phalanx of their young men in honor of his hero Alexander, a military unit named for the great conqueror himself. Every family in the city sends their sons. Fathers push boys forward proudly. Mothers straighten collars. This is the honor of a lifetime, a chance to serve directly under a Roman emperor. The young men gather in a broad plain outside the city walls, thousands of them unarmed, waiting for the emperor to inspect them. Caracalla arrives, walks the ranks, seems pleased. He gives a signal. His soldiers, who have been positioned around the plain in a ring, close the ring and begin the killing. According to Cassius Dio, the emperor described the massacre in his official dispatch to the Senate as a purification of the city. According to Herodian, the Nile itself ran red at its wide mouth from the blood carried down river by the drainage ditches. The bodies were tipped into mass graves. When the killing of the young men was finished, Caracalla unleashed his soldiers into the streets of Alexandria itself, and for days they looted, murdered, and burned. Estimates of the total dead range in the tens of thousands. Then came the erasure. The city walled off entire neighborhoods, dividing Alexandria into zones of controlled movement. Foreigners who were not merchants were expelled, and the city's own historians, the men who had chronicled every Ptolemy and every Roman visit for centuries, stopped writing his name. In documents from Alexandria, after 215 AD, Caracalla becomes the emperor. Just that, no proper noun. The papyri and the inscriptions and the local chronicles refused to record what he called himself. His portraits in the city were quietly recut. His statues were quietly removed. When he was assassinated 2 years later, urinating by the side of a road in Syria, cut down by a single sword stroke from a soldier named Julius Martialis, the news reached Alexandria, and the city did not mourn. It did not celebrate either. It simply moved on, having spent 2 years pretending he did not exist. The Roman Senate declared him a god, as was customary. Alexandria kept its silence. The city remembered every emperor who ever walked its streets except the one who tried to kill its future. His name lived on only because Rome would not let him die completely. But if you look at what Alexandria itself preserved, you can see something remarkable. A city that lost a generation of its own sons chose for the rest of its ancient history to erase the man who took them from it. Number 8. Pheretima of Cyrene and the walls of Barca, around 515 BC. In the North African city of Barca, in what is now Libya, a widowed queen stands on the newly conquered walls and gives an order that even Herodotus, the father of history, records with something like disgust. Nail them here. Nail them around the whole circuit. And when you run out of space, use the women. Pheretima is the mother of Arcesilaus III, king of Cyrene, a Greek colony on the coast of Libya. Her son had made powerful enemies. When he tried to restore the absolute royal power his ancestors had once held, the city rebelled, drove him out, and he fled to Barca, the city where his wife was born, where his father-in-law ruled. And in the marketplace of Barca, the exiles from Cyrene caught up with him and killed him along with his father-in-law. Pheretima, who had been ruling Cyrene in her son's absence, does not weep in a widow's chamber. She rides to Egypt. She goes to Ariandas, the Persian satrap installed by Cambyses to rule the province, and she begs for an army using the argument that her son's death was really an insult to Persia because he had been the Persian king's friend. Ariandas gives her the army, whether he does so out of pity or because he sees an opportunity to extend Persian influence into Libya, no one is sure. But the army comes and Pheretima rides at its head and it lays siege to Barca. The siege takes 9 months. The Barcaeans defend their city with skill and courage. The Persians eventually resort to trickery. They dig a wide trench in front of the walls, cover it with wooden planks and dirt, and offer terms of peace. The Barcaeans accept. They march out under a flag of truce to sign the treaty. Once past the trench, the planks are pulled away behind them, the trench is exposed, and the retreat is cut off. Barca falls. And now, Pheretima, mother of a murdered king, does the thing she has been dreaming about for 9 long months of siege. The men she considers most responsible for her son's death are impaled around the entire circuit of the city walls. Every gate, every tower, every corner. Herodotus is very specific about the number. So many that the walls run out of space. And when the walls run out of space, Pheretima orders the breasts of the men's wives cut off and nailed to the walls between the impaled bodies, filling the gaps. She has turned the city itself into a monument to her son's death. The rest of the population is sold into slavery. According to Herodotus, they end up in Bactria, the eastern edge of the Persian Empire, in what is now Afghanistan, a Greek city, its people scattered across the width of Asia by the vengeance of one queen. Then Pheretima returns to Egypt to hand the army back to the satrap. And here is where Herodotus makes it clear what he thinks of her. She contracts a disease. Her body, he writes, is consumed by worms while she is still alive. The flesh rots off her while she breathes. She dies in agony sometime in late 515 BC. And Herodotus, the man who has recorded the tortures of Persian kings and the sacrifices of Egyptian pharaohs without editorial commentary, cannot help himself. This is what happens, he writes, when men and women exceed the proper measure of vengeance. This is how the gods punish excess. Cyrene continued to exist, but the Badiad dynasty, the royal line that had ruled the city for 200 years, did not survive her. Her grandson Badus IV ruled briefly, and then the monarchy collapsed entirely, replaced by a republic. The city, having watched its queen turn a foreign siege into a personal atrocity, chose never to be ruled by kings again. Her name survived only in the historian's warning. In the local Cyrenian tradition, in the inscriptions of the city, in the memory the people chose to preserve, Pheretima simply stops appearing. She becomes the queen no one wants to mention. Number 7. Alexander of Pherae, the man who wept, at a play. In 369 BC, in the Thessalian city of Pherae in northern Greece, a young man murders his uncle with a spear and takes the throne. He then does something that ancient Greek writers describe with a shudder centuries later. He worships the spear as a god. He gives it its own altar. He offers sacrifices to it. This is Alexander of Pherae, and he is going to redefine what Greek writers mean when they use the word tyrant. Alexander comes to power at a moment of Thessalian ambition. His predecessor, Jason, had dreamed of uniting all of Thessaly into a single military federation capable of challenging Sparta and Athens. Alexander inherits that dream and pursues it with a competence that surprises everyone, including his enemies. He is a skilled general. He wins battles. Isocrates, the philosopher, writes to him with cautious praise, but the ambition sits inside a soul so damaged that even his political successes cannot mask what he is. Plutarch, writing centuries later, preserves the stories. Alexander of Pherae likes to bury men alive. He wraps them in the skins of wild animals, sews the skins shut, and then sets his hunting dogs on them. The dogs, smelling boar or bear, tear the men apart while they are still breathing. He does this to political prisoners. He does this to enemies. He does this sometimes to men whose only crime is to have annoyed him at dinner. He fills wells with living captives and orders them to be sealed. He invents new methods and tries them out on subjects he considers expendable. And then, in the middle of all this, there is the theater. Plutarch preserves the anecdote that made Alexander of Pherae famous throughout the ancient world. He attended a performance of a tragedy, one of the plays about Hecuba, the queen of fallen Troy, and in the middle of the play, watching an actor perform the grief of a mother who had lost everything, Alexander of Pherae began to weep. He wept openly, loudly, tears streaming down his face, and then, embarrassed that his soldiers might see him crying at a play, he stood up and left the theater before the performance ended. The story he told afterward was that he could not bear to be seen weeping for Hecuba, a fictional queen from 1,000 years earlier, when he had never wept for any of the men and women he had personally ordered killed. He understood, in that moment, that something was wrong with him. He understood it fully, and he did nothing about it. His wife Thebe watched him for years. She was his cousin, or by some accounts his half-sister, and she lived in genuine fear of him. Ancient sources give different reasons for her final action. Some say she had been mistreated. Some say Alexander had threatened to divorce her and marry another. Some say her 3 brothers, out of political ambition, convinced her. But the plan itself is the same in every source. On the night in 358 or 357 BC, Thebe drugs the guard dog. She covers the wooden ladder that leads up to the bedchamber with strips of wool, muffling every footstep. She hides her 3 brothers in the house all day. When Alexander sleeps, she removes the sword from beneath his pillow and, one by one, guides her brothers up the muffled ladder to the door. And here's the detail that makes the story unforgettable. The brothers, standing over Alexander's sleeping form, hesitate. They cannot do it. They stand frozen at the threshold, and Thebe hisses at them from the doorway that if they do not act now, she will wake him up herself. Faced with the certainty of their own deaths, they finally strike. Alexander is stabbed to death in his bed. His corpse is dragged out into the streets of Pherae, and here is the part that the local historians preserved with grim satisfaction. The people of Pherae did not bury him, they kicked the body. They spat on it. They dragged it through the mud of the marketplace. Plutarch says his corpse was thrown out and trampled on until there was nothing left recognizable as a man. The city that had lived under his cruelty for over a decade participated in the destruction of his body as a kind of collective purification, the way ancient Greeks disposed of scapegoats and pollutants. His statues in Pherae were pulled down. His name, in the local records, becomes a warning rather than a monarch. Later Greek writers would use him as a proverb. When they wanted to describe the wickedest possible ruler, they said, worse than Alexander of Pherae. The man who wept for Hecuba died a death his own victims might have envied. Number 6. King Zhou of Shang and the problem with victors' propaganda. Around 1046 BC, in the ancient Chinese capital of Yin, a king walks up to the highest tower of his palace, puts on a robe covered with 4,000 pieces of jade, and sets himself on fire. The armies of the Zhou dynasty are breaking through his walls. His own soldiers have turned their spears backward at the Battle of Muye and joined the invaders. His empire is finished, and King Daixin, the last ruler of the Shang, chooses immolation over capture. Then the Zhou dynasty writes his history, and this is where the ancient world's darkness gets complicated. The stories about King Zhou of Shang are the reason his name still exists as a byword for tyranny in Chinese culture. 3,000 years later. The wine pool and the meat forest. He supposedly built a lake filled with alcohol on his palace grounds large enough to sail small boats across, with an island in the middle covered in trees whose branches were hung with roasted meat. Naked men and women were forced to chase each other through the forest for his amusement, drinking from the lake with cupped hands and pulling meat from the trees as they passed. The burning pillar. A hollow bronze column was placed above a bed of burning charcoal until the metal glowed. Prisoners were forced to embrace the pillar, or to walk barefoot along its length while it was suspended horizontally, and were burned alive while the king and his consort Deji watched. The dissection of his uncle. the high minister Baigan repeatedly criticized the king's excesses. King Zhou, having heard that the hearts of sages had 7 chambers, ordered his uncle cut open while still alive so he could examine the man's heart and see whether he was truly wise. The extraction of embryos. Daji, according to the accounts, wanted to see the difference between the fetuses of pregnant women. Pregnant women were vivisected on her orders. All of this is preserved in Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, written 1,000 years after the events, and in the traditional histories that follow. And here is where honest storytelling has to acknowledge what modern archaeology has begun to uncover. Every single detail of King Zhou's cruelty was written down by the dynasty that overthrew him. The Zhou dynasty needed to justify what was, in ancient Chinese political theology, the near impossible act of overthrowing a legitimate king. The mandate of heaven had to be seen to be withdrawn. And for the mandate of heaven to be withdrawn, the king had to be so grotesquely wicked that heaven itself demanded his removal. Excavations at Yingshu, the site of the last Shang capital, have not produced physical evidence of the wine pool or the meat forest. The burning pillar, as described, appears in accusations against multiple earlier tyrants, suggesting it may be a literary trope rather than a historical practice. Some of the specific atrocities attributed to King Zhou appear almost verbatim in accounts of the previous fallen dynasty's last king, Jie of Xia. What we can say with confidence is this: the Shang dynasty did practice large-scale human sacrifice. This is confirmed by tens of thousands of skeletons recovered from Yingshu. King Zhou did fight prolonged wars against neighboring peoples that drained the treasury. He did purge members of his own family, including his uncle Bigan, though whether the manner of execution matched the legend is impossible to verify. And when the Zhou dynasty won, they systematically erased what had come before. Shang oracle bones were buried, Shang bronzes were melted down, Shang temples were dismantled. The name of King Zhou was preserved only in the version his enemies wrote. This is the peculiar horror of number 6. He may have been every bit the monster the traditional histories claim. Or he may have been an ordinary Bronze Age king whose defeat required his memory to become monstrous. What is undeniable is this: his own people, the Shang, do not survive as a political entity to tell their side. The only Shang voices we have are the bones of their sacrificial victims and the inscriptions on their bronzes. Everything else was written by the winners. Erasure in the case of King Zhou of Shang is not just cultural, it is total. The last Shang king survives in history only as the shape his conquerors needed him to be. And you cannot know for sure, standing 3,000 years later, whether the man behind the legend was worse than the legend or completely different from it. Ancient tyranny sometimes hides its truth precisely by drowning in propaganda. Number 5. Liu Pengli, the first documented serial killer in human history. In 144 BC, the great historian Sima Qian is compiling the records of the Han-dynasty, and he pauses to include a paragraph so brief and so terrible that modern criminologists still cite it. The paragraph is about a prince. Liu Pengli is the nephew of Emperor Jing of Han. When his father Liu Wu, the powerful prince of Liang, dies in disgrace, the emperor divides his father's lands among 5 sons. Liu Pengli receives Jidong, a small kingdom in what is now Shandong province. He is a member of the imperial family distant from the throne but connected by blood, protected by rank, and free from any meaningful oversight. And according to Sima Qian, at some point in his reign, Liu Pengli discovers what he actually wants to do with his position. He recruits a band of roughly 20 or 30 followers. Sima Qian describes them as slaves and young men in hiding from the law, people with nothing to lose and appetites to match his own. And in the darkness after sunset, Liu Pengli and his followers begin riding out into the countryside of his own kingdom. They select victims at random. They kill them, they take whatever the victims own, and they do this, in Sima Qian's precise language, for sheer sport. He is not killing for money, though he takes the money. He is not killing for political reasons, though the killings certainly reinforce his power. He is not killing enemies of the state. He is killing his own subjects, the people who pay taxes to him, the people whose loyalty he theoretically depends on, and he is doing it because he enjoys it. The horror spreads through Jidong like a slow poison. Sima Qian writes that within a few years, the people of the kingdom would not leave their houses after dark. They barricaded their doors, they avoided the roads, they lived in a state of collective terror produced by a single man and his 30 followers. Confirmed victims, according to Sima Qian's dry paragraph, exceeded 100. Confirmed, meaning the ones the investigators could trace and count after the fact. The actual number, given how many nights this went on and how thoroughly he covered his tracks, was almost certainly higher. This continues, according to the records, for something like 20 years. 2 decades of a kingdom terrorized by its own ruler and no one moves against him. He is imperial family, he is untouchable. Rumors reach the capital. Reports are dismissed. Officials do not investigate their emperor's own nephew for fear of what happens to officials who make such accusations. Finally, in the 29th year of his reign, the son of one of Liu Pengli's victims makes a formal accusation directly to the emperor. This is a young man risking his own execution to name the killer of his father. The evidence is presented, the court investigators verify it, the officials of the court recommend the mandatory penalty for the murder of even a single subject by a ruler. They ask the emperor to sentence Liu Pengli to death. And here is where the story becomes even darker in its implications. The Emperor Jing, an otherwise capable ruler remembered for competent governance, cannot bring himself to execute his own nephew. He commutes the sentence. Liu Pengli is stripped of his royal title, demoted to the status of a commoner, and exiled to a distant county in what is now Hubei province. That is the entire penalty for over 100 murders. His territory is quietly reabsorbed into the empire. The dead go uncompensated. The families of the victims receive nothing. And Sima Qian. The historian records the case in exactly one paragraph, buried in a long chronicle of Han princes, as if he cannot bring himself to give it more space than that. The people of Jidong do not build monuments to their liberation. They do not celebrate, they simply resume their lives, presumably relieved that the nights are safe again, and their prince, the man who terrorized them for 2 decades, disappears into official archives. His name appears in one imperial document. His crimes appear in one paragraph. No temple, no statue, no eulogy, no proper history. The Han-dynasty found it easier to forget him than to reckon with what his existence meant. Which is why when modern criminologists want to identify the earliest confirmed serial killer in the historical record, they end up citing Liu Pengli of Jidong, a Chinese prince who committed over 100 murders for sport, protected by his bloodline, remembered by no one, and ultimately erased so thoroughly that most modern educated readers have never even heard his name. His victims deserved better. They got Sima Qian's single paragraph. That paragraph is still more than the traditional histories give many of them. Number 4, Clearchus of Heraclea, the man who dressed as Zeus. Around 365 BC, in the Greek colony of Heraclea Pontica on the southern shore of the Black Sea, a young aristocrat named Clearchus returns from his studies in Athens. He has been trained by 2 of the greatest minds of the age. He has sat at the feet of Plato in the academy. He has spent 4 years with the rhetorician Isocrates. He has been given, by the standards of his time, the finest education a young man could receive. And he uses that education to seize absolute power over his native city and to invent one of the strangest personal cults in the ancient world. Heraclea, in the 360s BC, is a wealthy trading city divided between an aristocratic council and a restive population of common citizens demanding land redistribution and debt cancellation. The council, terrified of a popular uprising, recalls Clearchus from exile and invites him to solve the problem. He arrives, negotiates with the local warlord Mithridates of Cius for backup, and then, in a maneuver that would impress a modern political operative, betrays both sides simultaneously. He seizes Mithridates and ransoms him back for a huge sum. He then turns to the common citizens, promises them everything the aristocrats have denied them, and takes command of a mercenary army. Within months, the aristocrats who invited him back are dead, or exiled, their estates redistributed to his supporters, their daughters married off to freed slaves, and enlisted mercenaries in what the ancient sources describe as a systematic humiliation of the old order. And Clearchus is now the tyrant of Heraclea. This might have been the end of the story. Greek cities had cycled through tyrants for centuries. What happens next is what makes Clearchus different. He begins to believe he is a god, not metaphorically. Not in the sense that Hellenistic kings would later claim divine honors. He begins to actually believe, or at least to publicly perform, that he is the son of Zeus. Memnon, the local historian of Heraclea, whose fragments survive through the Byzantine Encyclopedia of Photius, describes the transformation in unforgettable detail. Clearchus starts calling himself the son of Zeus. He paints his face with unnatural dyes, gold on his cheeks, red at the lips, arranging his features to look glistening or ruddy at his own preference for the day's audience. He varies his clothing to appear fearsome or elegant, depending on his mood. He carries an eagle on his shoulder, the sacred bird of Zeus. He rides through the streets of Heraclea in a chariot dressed for religious processions, receiving worship from citizens who have no choice but to bow. And then he names his son. He names his son Cyrene. The word means thunderbolt. He names his own child after the weapon of the god he claims to have fathered him. The city of Heraclea now contains a father who publicly performs as Zeus, and the son publicly performing as the thunderbolt in Zeus's hand. It is not clear whether the citizens found this more terrifying or more absurd. What is clear is that opposition began to form. Clearchus responded with paranoia and violence. Alien records that he kept a scorpion in a box and would show it to disobedient subjects with the implicit threat that they might be next to be locked inside. He executed opponents by means that Memnon says he cannot bring himself to describe in detail. He filled the city's prisons and its cemeteries. And when Qian of Heraclea, another former student of Plato's, returned to the city and found what his classmate had become, he made a decision. Qian assembled a small group of conspirators, all fellow students of Plato, all men who had been taught in the academy that tyranny was the worst possible form of government. They chose the moment of a public sacrifice, a religious procession in which Clearchus, dressed as always in his gold-painted divinity, walked at the head of a parade of priests. Qian approached him in the crowd, drew a hidden blade, and stabbed him in the side. Clearchus did not die immediately. He lingered for 2 days in agony, and Memnon records that he was tormented in his final hours by hallucinations of all the people he had killed, their ghosts crowding his sick room demanding to be recognized. He was 58 years old. He had ruled Heraclea for 12 years. Qian himself was killed on the spot by Clearchus's bodyguards, dying with what Memnon calls the joy of a man who had done what he came to do. But here is the tragedy. The assassination did not free Heraclea. Clearchus's brother, Satyrus, took power and was by common consent of the ancient sources worse than his brother had been. Clearchus's own son, the boy named Thunderbolt, eventually inherited the tyranny. The city lived under the descendants of the false Zeus for another 80 years before the whole line was finally exterminated by an outside conqueror. Qian of Heraclea killed the man, but not the disease. And that is what makes number 4 an entry about the strange endurance of ancient tyranny. You can stab the man who thinks he is a god, but you cannot kill the appetite for tyranny in a city that has learned to bow. Number 3. Polycrates of Samos, the tyrant the sea refused to punish. Sometime in the 530s BC, on the Greek island of Samos, in the eastern Aegean, a tyrant sits on the deck of his fastest warship and prepares to throw the most valuable object he owns into the sea. His name is Polycrates. He is the most successful pirate in the Mediterranean. He is also the most feared naval power in the Greek world. He commands a fleet of 100 pentaconers and 1,000 archers, and he has spent years plundering ships of every nationality on the principle which he articulates openly, that a friend is more grateful for the return of stolen property than he would be for the property never being stolen in the first place. He has seized islands. He has captured mainland towns. He has defeated the lesbians in a sea battle and used the prisoners as slave labor to dig the moat around his citadel. His court is a glittering thing that includes the poet Anacreon and the physician Democedes of Croton. He has built one of the wonders of the ancient world, the Eupolinian Aqueduct, a tunnel dug through a mountain from both ends that meets in the middle with remarkable precision. And he is worried. He is worried because his ally, the Egyptian pharaoh Amasis, has written him a letter. Amasis has observed that Polycrates is winning at everything. Every raid succeeds, every gamble pays off, every enemy falls. And Amasis, who knows the gods of Egypt and Greece, both understands that this cannot continue indefinitely. The gods punish uninterrupted success because success without limit is hubris. So Amasis advises his friend to introduce a controlled disaster into his life to sacrifice something he loves so much that the loss will hurt in order to head off a much worse loss the gods will otherwise impose. Polycrates thinks about this for a long time, and he decides that the object he loves most is a ring, an emerald signet stone set in gold, made by the master jeweler Alexander of Samos. He takes the ring to sea. He rows out on his ship in full view of witnesses, and he throws the ring into the water. He watches it sink. He returns to the palace and mourns for 5 days. On the 6th day, a fisherman arrives at the palace with the largest fish he has ever caught, wanting to present it as a gift to his king. The fish is taken to the kitchens. It is opened. And there, inside the belly of the fish, is Polycrates' ring. When the letter reaches Amasis in Egypt describing what has happened, the pharaoh understands immediately what it means. The gods have refused the sacrifice. The gods have refused to be appeased. Amasis writes, back terminating the alliance, explaining that he cannot afford to be the ally of a man the gods have already marked for destruction. And here's what Herodotus does with the story. He tells us it is a fairy tale. He knows it. He knows the story of the ring returning inside the fish is the kind of thing that appears in the folklore of many cultures. But he includes it anyway, because what happens next is not a fairy tale. What happens next is the crucifixion of the happiest man in Greece. Around 522 BC, with Persian power expanding into Western Asia, the satrap of Sardis, a man named Oroetus, decides that Polycrates has become a problem. Oroetus has never met Polycrates. He has no personal grudge, but he has been taunted by a fellow satrap for failing to add Samos to the Persian Empire, and he decides that acquiring Samos means removing Polycrates from it. Oroetus sends a message to the tyrant. He claims to be planning a rebellion against his own king, Cambyses, and he needs a safe place to move his enormous personal treasure. If Polycrates will meet him on the mainland to receive the treasure, they can share it, and Polycrates will have wealth beyond anything he has ever imagined. Polycrates is warned by everyone. His soothsayers see terrible omens. His own daughter has a prophetic dream in which she sees her father hanging in the air, washed by the rain of Zeus and anointed by the oil of the sun. She begs him not to go. He calls her a silly girl and threatens to keep her unmarried into old age for her disrespect. He sails to the mainland. He is arrested the moment he arrives. And Herodotus, when he comes to describe what Oroetus did to Polycrates, does something unusual for him. He refuses. He writes that Polycrates was killed in a manner too foul to describe, and that even to speak of it would be a violation of proper narrative. What we can piece together from other sources is that Polycrates was tortured and then crucified, hung on a wooden frame outside the city walls, and left there. His daughter's dream came true, precisely. The rain fell on him. The sun oiled his skin as it decomposed. He was the wealthiest, luckiest, most successful Greek tyrant of his generation, and he ended as carrion. The Samians did not build a monument. They did not compose a lament. The tyranny of Polycrates had been long and heavy, and when Persian power finally took the island a few years later, no one on Samos organized resistance in his name. His brother Silason eventually returned as a Persian client tyrant, but Polycrates himself became something the island preferred not to discuss. He survives in Herodotus because Herodotus was collecting stories, not because Samos wanted him remembered. And this is what makes the entry at number 3 uniquely disturbing. Polycrates was not overthrown by his own people. He was not assassinated by conspirators. He was destroyed by an outside power for reasons of imperial competition, and the moment he was gone, his own people participated in the erasure by refusing to mourn him. The gods, if you believe Herodotus, punished him for the ring. His subjects punished him by not caring when he died. Number 2, Nabis of Sparta and the mechanical wife. In 207 BC, the ancient city of Sparta is a shadow of itself. The great warrior state that once defeated Athens has been reduced to a minor power in the Peloponnese. Its dual kingship a memory, its once proud citizen army, long since dispersed. Into this vacuum steps a man named Nabis. He claims descent from the old Eurypontid royal line, though the claim is disputed. What is not disputed is what he does with power. Nabis rules Sparta for 15 years, from 207 to 192 BC, and during those years he does something that even the historians hostile to him find genuinely disturbing. He extends citizenship to slaves, freedmen, and mercenaries. He confiscates the estates of the traditional Spartan aristocracy and redistributes their land. He marries the widows of exiled aristocrats to his own mercenaries as a systematic act of humiliation and demographic replacement. Polybius, the great historian of the age, cannot decide whether Nabis is a social revolutionary or a monster wearing revolutionary clothing. He settles for calling him both. What Polybius has no ambiguity about is the machine. According to Polybius, writing in his histories, Nabis constructed a device for the purpose of extracting money from wealthy Spartan citizens who resisted his taxation. The device was a life-size mechanical replica of his own wife, Apega. Apega was, according to Polybius, a woman of Argive origin who Nabis had married as part of his political consolidation, and she was, if the sources are to be believed, worse than her husband. Polybius describes her going to Argos with Nabis during the occupation of that city and summoning the wives of the leading citizens under pretexts of hospitality, then stripping them of their jewelry, flogging them, and inflicting further tortures until they surrendered the wealth of their husbands. She was, in short, a woman who understood the theater of corrosion, and her husband built a machine in her image. The machine Polybius describes was a wooden and metal figure of a beautifully dressed woman richly clothed to look like Apega herself. Its arms were extended in a welcoming embrace. When a citizen refused to pay the taxes, Nabis demanded the tyrant would summon him to a private chamber, engage him in what appeared to be a friendly negotiation, and then suggest that if the man could not agree with Nabis, perhaps he could discuss the matter with Apega. The doors would open, the mechanical figure would be revealed, and Nabis would insist that the citizen embrace her. The moment the man's arms went around the figure, Nabis would activate hidden springs. The arms of the machine would close, and the machine would drive iron nails concealed on its breasts, arms, and hands into the man's body. Polybius is precise about the mechanism. Springs, concealed levers operated by Nabis himself from behind the figure. The machine could tighten its grip incrementally, allowing Nabis to negotiate for hours if he chose, extracting a signature, then a signature on a larger sum, then the man's estate, then the location of hidden family gold, before finally either releasing the survivor or tightening the springs to their full extension and killing him outright. Polybius says that a considerable number of Spartans died in the embrace of the mechanical Apega. The machine, in other words, was not a legend or a metaphor or a piece of dark humor. It was, according to the most reliable historical source we have for the period, a working piece of engineering used systematically to torture the citizens of Sparta. This is where honest history has to acknowledge the sources. Polybius hated Nabis. Polybius was writing from the perspective of the aristocratic families whose property Nabis had seized and whose sons Nabis had exiled. It is possible that the machine, as described, is an exaggeration of something less elaborate or a rhetorical figure that Polybius made physical for effect. But the specificity of his description, the mechanical details of springs and concealed nails, and the corroboration in later sources like Diodorus suggests that something like the Apega existed. Nabis was eventually assassinated in 192 billion C, not by his own people, but by an Aetolian named Alexamenus, whom he had invited into Sparta as an ally. The Aetolian killed him during a military inspection. The Spartans, presented with the corpse of their tyrant, did not mourn. They did not build a tomb. His social revolution was reversed by the Achaean League. Within months, the confiscated estates returned to their original families or to Achaean supporters, the freedmen and slaves he had made citizens stripped of their rights. And the mechanical apiga, whatever it had actually been, disappeared from history entirely. No archaeologist has ever found a component of it. No local Spartan tradition preserved a description of it. Only Polybius, writing from outside Sparta, preserved the memory, which is fitting, because the Sparta that emerged after Nabis was a city that wanted to forget the whole reign. Nabis had exposed the possibility that Sparta could be ruled by something other than the old dual kingship. He had shown that the aristocratic order was contingent. And when he died, the city did what cities do when they want to erase a possibility. It pretended the possibility had never existed. The mechanical wife became a footnote, the tyrant became a warning. And Sparta, humiliated and impoverished, continued its slow decline into becoming a tourist attraction for visiting Roman senators. Number 1, Apollodorus of Cassandreia, and the oath that made ancient Greeks lose their appetites. In 279 BC, in the Macedonian city of Cassandreia, on the peninsula that had once been the site of Potidaea, a man in his prime is preparing a dinner for his closest political allies. His name is Apollodorus. He is a well-connected local politician who has spent years cultivating a reputation as a friend of the common people, a champion of the poor, an enemy of the corrupt oligarchs who have been enriching themselves at the city's expense. His speeches are moving. His generosity is public. His enemies underestimate him. And tonight, in a private house in Cassandra, he is going to swear an oath with the 6 or 7 men who will help him seize the city. The oath ceremonies of ancient Greek conspiracies typically involved wine, sometimes mixed with a few drops of blood from the participants themselves poured into a common cup and drunk to seal the pact. This was a well-understood ritual. It bound the conspirators by a religious as well as a political obligation. It was serious. It was solemn. It was familiar. What Apollodorus has planned is not that. He has captured a boy. Ancient sources do not agree on the boy's exact age. Diodorus Siculus, whose fragmentary account is our main source, calls him a young man, which in Greek usage could mean anywhere from about 14 to the early 20s. Later sources call him a boy, using terms that suggest an even younger victim. What is not disputed is that he was one of the citizens of Cassandreia, born free, no threat to Apollodorus, selected specifically because his death would carry no political consequence. Apollodorus kills him at the beginning of the dinner. The manner of killing is described by Diodorus with what modern classicists agree is the language of formal sacrifice, the same vocabulary the Greeks used for the ritual slaughter of an animal at an altar. He cuts the boy's throat over a bronze basin. He catches the blood, he mixes it with the wine intended for the sealing of the oath, and he passes the mixed cup around the table. The conspirators, one by one, drink. They cannot refuse. To refuse is to expose themselves as untrustworthy, as squeamish as the kind of man who might one day change sides. Drinking the blood binds them to Apollodorus in a way ordinary wine cannot. Whatever crimes they may later commit together, this is the crime that cannot be undone, cannot be denied, and cannot be atoned for. They have all participated in the ritual murder of a child. And then, the sources say, Apollodorus goes further. He has the boy's flesh butchered and cooked. He serves it at the meal. The conspirators eat. Whether all of them understood in the moment what they were eating, or whether some realized only later, the sources are unclear. But the ceremony is complete. The oath is sealed. The city of Cassandreia now has a tyrant, and his inner circle is bound to him by an act of cannibalism they can never reveal to another human being without incriminating themselves. This is what the ancient sources actually say happened. Diodorus preserves the outline. Polycrates, writing centuries later on the tricks of tyranny, includes Apollodorus in his Catalogue of Monsters. The Epicurean philosopher Philodemus mentions him as the reference point for absolute evil. And Aelian, writing in the 3rd century AD, on natural history casually invokes Apollodorus alongside Phalaris as one of the 2 tyrants whose names still made educated Greeks flinch. From 279 to 276 BC, Apollodorus ruled Cassandreia with the kind of paranoid violence you would expect from a man who has taken such an oath. He allied with the invading Gauls who were sweeping south into Greece. He confiscated the estates of anyone he suspected of disloyalty. He filled the city with informers. He is said to have suffered from constant nightmares in his final years, waking screaming from dreams no one dared ask him to describe. Antigonus II Gonatas, king of Macedonia, spent 10 months besieging Cassandreia in 276 BC without breaking through. The city walls held. Apollodorus had prepared for exactly this kind of external threat, and his mercenaries fought hard. In the end, it was not siege engines that ended his reign. It was betrayal. Antigonus recruited a former pirate named Amanias, who was known to Apollodorus and had a personal relationship with him. Amanias approached the tyrant, claiming to be a peacemaker, offering to negotiate a settlement between him and Antigonus. He supplied provisions. He supplied wine. He built Apollodorus' confidence over weeks of apparent goodwill. And while Apollodorus relaxed his guard, Amanias arranged for 2,000 Macedonian soldiers and 10 Aetolian pirates to be smuggled into the city under cover of the peace negotiations. The city fell in a single night. Apollodorus was captured. His death, the ancient sources tell us in unusual detail for an era that often glossed over executions, was slow. He was tortured for information, for the location of hidden wealth, for the names of collaborators. He gave up nothing. Or he gave up everything. The sources disagree. What they agree on is that when he finally died, his body was displayed publicly and the city of Cassandreia burned everything associated with him. His palace was stripped. His personal shrine was smashed. Any statue of him was pulled down. The names of his co-conspirators, the men who had drunk the blood with him, were, as far as we can tell from the record, systematically expunged from every Cassandrian document. He was buried without honor. His descendants, if he had any, were not permitted to claim inheritance. Even the boy he had killed, the specific boy whose blood had sealed the conspiracy, is anonymous in the historical record. Diodorus did not preserve his name, or did not know it, or did not think readers wanted to know it. He is the anonymous child at the center of the darkest oath ceremony in the ancient Greek record. And for the next 300 years, whenever an educated Greek or Roman writer wanted a single name to represent the absolute limit of human political evil, the name they reached for was Apollodorus of Cassandreia. Not Nero, not Caligula. Not any of the tyrants their own generation had lived under. Apollodorus, the man who ate a boy to bind his allies. This is why he is number 1. Not because his body count was the highest, because it was not. Not because his methods were the most theatrical, because Nabis had a mechanical wife and Alexander of Pherae fed men to dogs. Apollodorus takes the top of this list because he crossed the one line the ancient world could not forgive. He turned murder into a sacrament. He turned cannibalism into a political ritual, and when his enemies finally reached him, they did not just kill him, they tried to erase him. The city of Cassandreia continued to exist. It was still functioning centuries later. It was still producing poets and merchants and inscriptions. And in all of that, in all the surviving material culture of the city that Apollodorus once ruled, his name almost never appears. He is the man Cassandreia refused to remember. The historians outside Cassandreia preserved him as a warning. His own city preserved him not at all. 10 tyrants, 10 men and women who ruled by fear, who thought their cruelty made them powerful, who mistook the silence of the terrified for consent. Astyages served a father, his son, and lost an empire. Caracalla killed a generation and lost his own name. Pheretima nailed a city to its walls and rotted from the inside out. Alexander of Pherae wept at a play and could not weep for anyone he had killed. King Zhou of Shang either burned men on bronze pillars or was slandered as if he did, and we may never know which. Liu Pengli hunted his own subjects for sport and got 2 decades of impunity followed by a single paragraph. Clearchus painted himself gold and was stabbed in his golden robes. Polycrates threw a ring into the sea and was crucified in the sun. Nabis built a wife who killed and died at the hands of a friend. And Apollodorus of Cassandreia became the name every ancient writer reached for when they needed to describe an evil no polite reader would recognize. Not one of these tyrants died in bed of natural causes. Not one of them was mourned by the people they ruled. And in almost every case, their own cities and their own descendants participated in the deliberate erasure of their memory, pulling down statues, destroying documents, refusing to speak their names in public inscription. This is the peculiar mercy of ancient political theology. Some men were considered too poisonous to remember. Some were considered pollutants who had to be washed out of the record so that the city itself could survive. It did not always work. Some of them, like Caracalla and King Zhou, survived in enemy sources that were happy to preserve every horror. Some, like Apollodorus, survived only as a synonym for evil in the writings of philosophers who never knew him. Some, like Liu Pengli, almost vanished entirely and are known only because one historian was determined that even the worst men should not disappear completely. And this is where you come in. Which one of them shocked you most? Was it the mechanical wife of Nabis? Cold iron nails hidden inside silk clothing? Was it the child in Apollodorus's cup, whose name we will never know? Was it Alexander of Pherae, weeping at a play he could not connect to his own atrocities? Drop a comment below and tell us. Tell us where you are watching from, because the community that watches this channel spans every continent, and you are what makes this work. If this ranking changed how you see ancient tyranny, hit that like button now. It tells YouTube to show this to more people who care about the histories the textbooks skipped. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next ranking is already on its way and you will not want to miss it. We are going to be looking at the cities the ancient world erased, the ones so cursed or so shamed that their names disappeared from the maps for 1,000 years. Some of them were burned by conquerors. Some of them were abandoned by their own citizens. And some of them, like the tyrants on this list, were erased on purpose, because what happened inside their walls was something no one wanted their children to remember. Thank you for watching. These tyrants deserve to be remembered not for what they did to their people, but for what their people did to them in return. Silence, in the ancient world, was sometimes the loudest verdict of all. We will see you in the next video.